Thank you so much for attending the best session of the day, at least the most relevant to Long Island's long-term well-being. We have a diverse and well-rounded panel that will provide diverse perspectives and shed light on a range of solutions and best practices related to this issue that we're dealing with, both fair or unfair housing. Each panelist will give you a lay of what the next hour and 10 minutes, or maybe an hour, because I think we might have to cut it back. Each panelist will speak for a few minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions and spend the second half, having a dialogue with you all and just addressing those things that are pressing on your mind. I'd like to quickly introduce our experts here. We have a really great panel. We had a pre-call, and I'm very excited that they're going to be sharing this information with you all. I'll start over here to my right. Legislator Sila Bino with the Huntington Housing Authority, but also Nassau County Legislator, 2nd Legislative District. I'm Sol Marie Alfonso Jones. I'm a Senior Program Officer at the Long Island Community Foundation. Sharon Mullen, who heads up the Fair Housing Program at the Long Island Housing Partnership. And then we have Peter Flory, who is with D&F Developers Group. He's an affordable housing developer. And Randy Kaplan, the Director of Nassau.
National.
Right there, yeah. Is the Director of Government Affairs at Long Island Board of Realtors. We were also going to have Joanne Durovich join us, who is overseeing the Institute of Attainable Homes at St. Joseph's, also a professor there. However, she is not going to be able to attend due to some issues, pressing issues that she's had to deal with, but I'm going to try to do a little bit of what she would have done. So just in terms of introductory comments, for more than a decade, the Long Island Community Foundation has taken an active role in advocating for more affordable and equitable housing landscape on Long Island because we recognize that housing is the bedrock for quality of life. The Long Island Community Foundation is a grant-making institution. We have a board member here, Marge Rogatz. We have been in existence over 30 years, and we're an affiliate of the New York Community Trust. We give away money to nonprofits that are addressing, nonprofits on Long Island that are addressing issues that are impacting or affecting quality of life here. We recognize that every community has a responsibility to provide a range of housing choices for its residents, including centrally located apartments for seniors, diverse family structures, and singles. Excluding people based on race and class, age, or other attributes must not be tolerated. However, Long Island historically has not done a great job of doing this. In May of this year, in a community that is 84% white, a grandmom, a mom, and her children who lived in a home, homeowners, received this letter. Attention, African American family. The all caps note read. This is coming from X community. I'm just not going to mention it because it's just on Long Island, but it could be any community. You don't belong here, the letter continued. Please leave said community as soon as you can. It will be better for all of us. The letter urged the woman to find a town where there are more people like you and ended with, sorry if this is rude, but it's the truth. The homeowner's response, I went from being fearful, protecting my family, to being totally confused and wanted to know who and why. Today, it becomes even deeper. Is it someone in the school district? Is it the guy at the corner store? Is it my neighbor down the street? Where? Our region has the unfortunate distinction of being one of the most racially segregated in the nation, the result of a long history of federally sanctioned discriminatory policies, racially restricted covenants, and blockbusting. Segregated housing patterns are perpetuated today intentionally or unintentionally by exclusionary zoning laws that severely restrict mobility opportunities for people of color. Despite federal, county, and local and state anti-discriminatory laws aimed at promoting diverse, inclusive communities, a majority of Long Island's Black and Hispanic families live in only 20 communities of 300 on Long Island. Nassau and Suffolk County's analysis of impediments to fair housing studies indicate that 39% of Blacks and 21% of Latinos have experienced some sort of housing discrimination. In addition, discrimination against people with disabilities accounts for half of cases investigated by the Long Island Housing Services. Yet restrictive codes by municipalities persist. These segregated patterns have resulted in severe disparities in access to opportunities for minority communities, which greatly affect outcomes from school quality to public health. Differential treatment based on race or ethnicity is illegal under the Federal Fair Housing Act, and providing quality housing for all people is an integral component of the smart growth strategy, which is why I'm very happy that this is a panel in today's conference. No single type of housing can serve the varied needs of today's diverse households. Smart growth represents an opportunity for local communities to increase housing choice, not only by modifying land use patterns on newly developed land, but also by increasing housing supply in existing neighborhoods and on land served by existing infrastructure. Integrating single and multi-family structures in new housing developments can support a more diverse population and allow more equitable distribution of households of all income levels. Today's esteemed panel will share policies and laws and strategies to affirmatively further fair housing so that all communities can adequately accommodate the needs of the region's socioeconomically diverse residents, and so that they align with smart growth principles. So with that introduction, I want to pass it on to my colleague here on the left, Sharon Mullen, to give us an overview of fair housing laws.
All right, I'm standing up and moving over here with my clicker. Good morning, everybody, and I certainly want to thank Vision for inviting us to be here, and Eric for hosting this. And I know he's had a fair housing panel for many years, so it's great and important. A version of this PowerPoint is on the Long Island Housing Partnership website, but I've included some extra slides. And I know we're going to have to shorten our presentations today, so I'm moving a little bit faster. What we're trying to do at Long Island Housing Partnership is educate consumers so that they understand when they are being discriminated against, what are some of the signs, because we also understand that it's much more subtle today than ever before, so that people will be discriminating against African Americans or Hispanics or some other group when they come in to rent, but they'll do it with a smile. So there are lots of ways around it. When people begin to understand this, they can report it. And we work closely with Long Island Housing Services and refer lots of cases there, as well as sometimes directly to the Department of Justice. I don't know how well you can read this, but looking at federal and state laws, also one of the laws I think that's particularly important that we're seeing that's new in Suffolk County is the source of income protection for discrimination against that. So I'm going to talk about some of these a little bit more. These are just some of the fair housing related laws. And again, I'm going through this, but this is on the website because I really want to get to, now here's our protected classes. How many of you really have a basic understanding of fair housing in here? Yeah, so I'm not going to keep going back over things you already know. But it covers most types of housing. As I said, the source of income protection is really important. It's both in Nassau and Suffolk. We are looking as part of a coalition to hope that we could move this forward throughout the state. These are some examples of rental discrimination, and where they are showing whites only, certain types of communities. And also with real estate discrimination, steering buyers to certain communities, and this is still happening today. Mortgage discrimination. We saw a lot of this, particularly with the fallout in foreclosure, that once that foreclosure prices hit and they were examining the mortgage products that people were given, they saw that a lot of minority people were given very, very high rates, despite the fact that they had similar credit scores to other people, and the rest of their circumstances were fairly similar. Same thing happening in home insurance. Okay, so It's discrimination if you are a member of one of the protected classes. All right, now other protections for reasonable accommodations, and these are some of the things that are very interesting. Reasonable accommodations, so providing a deaf or hard of hearing person with written documents. Now, we just started at the partnership to provide interpreter services for ASL. So we have a contract with Milnet. So when we know that a client is coming in and needs that service, we are able to get someone that also understands budgeting, because most of the clients that are coming to us are coming for housing counseling. So we want to make sure that the interpreter also has the skill to be able to talk about budgets and things like that they're going to have that as part of their working vocabulary. Also, you know how many places say no pets allowed. Now, we're also getting calls from different property management companies and things like that. Well, a service animal is not a pet, okay? It performs a service for the person that's needed for them to be able to enjoy a good quality of life. So the no pets rule does not apply. And, you know, this is another problem that we see all the time throughout the country and on Long Island. An example of a reasonable modification, that the grab bars, or perhaps things like if someone is vision impaired, then there'd be a ladder, a way for them to understand that someone's at the door. So different doorbell systems and things like that. The same thing if they are hearing impaired, there's flashing lights that can go off instead. So there are all kinds of adaptive devices. These are standard design and construction requirements. So if it was built after 1991, these accessibility standards should be there, which means that if you use a wheelchair, you should be able to reach your switches, your thermostat, and things like that without having to, you know, have someone else help you. So now, the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones I really wanted to focus on. So we're looking at affirmatively furthering fair housing and what's the duty. So I think the key here is to understand that it's really not enough to refrain from discriminating. It's a proactive message. You're supposed to be doing something to foster integration, to actively promote integration, and prevent the increase of segregation. So we've seen some problems on Long Island, particularly with where housing is being situated, so that it actually reinforces already segregated communities. Expanding fair housing choice, giving people the opportunity to live in other areas, so in areas of greater opportunity with better school districts. Transforming what we call recaps, which are racial, ethnic, concentrated areas of poverty. And so there's a balance here. So you have the opportunity on one side. We're not walking away entirely from revitalizing communities, but there's also a balance with providing that mobility to people that would choose a higher opportunity area. And moving away from the analysis of impediments to a new assessment of fair housing, which is a much more comprehensive way to look at a region and to plan. So HUD has now come up with a whole planning tool. They have geospatial documents there, and it's really more formula-based, so it should be much easier for public jurisdictions that have to do analysis of impediments, which is now going to be called the assessment of fair housing. It should be easier for them to do. It's more directed, it's more systematic, and I think a lot of people will be very happy to have that. Okay, so this is some of the things that I really did want to look at. How much more do I have?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. These are some of the big things that we're seeing. Just the other day, I read in Newsday that a new developer is doing a project, I'm not naming names, but he's marketing for empty nesters and young professionals. Who's he leaving out? Families, a protected class, okay? 10%, here's another one, 10% affordable but no Section 8 allowed. That's illegal, okay? Landlord property manager in Nassau Village said it's a claim for race discrimination. Now, occupancy standards are another really big problem because somewhere along the line, landlords began and property managers thought they were the bedroom police, I guess. So it was the standard of 2 people per bedroom. While that might be a norm or a general rule of thumb, you have to consider all the circumstances, the size of the unit, the age of the children, and really, you have no right to go into someone's bedroom and tell them where people can sleep or into their apartment, okay? Maybe you choose to sleep in the living room. So, these are all cases that are recent, and some of them are the last one there, the New York-based property management firm settled in 5 states and over occupancy standards. All right. Reasonable accommodations. A great big one for interpretation services for signing, and this suit was just filed by Fair Housing Justice Center. Reasonable modifications. You know, these are part of the design standards that came out from DOJ and HUD in 2008. Again, this is on LAHP's website. 3 complexes on Long Island, senior complexes, just signed, you know, consent judgment for lack of accessible wheelchair routes, and sinks and ranges and outlets that people couldn't use. So we have developers who are building these things with architects that, I guess, don't understand the rules. And that whole pets versus service animals is continuing on, and there's been a number of complaints that are being settled. And I'll do one more. These are really great fair housing websites. These are put up by HUD, particularly that second one. It's HUD Fair Housing Information Clearinghouse. So for people that are in the field and perhaps don't understand occupancy levels and things like that, you can do a keyword search on that and pull out all the documents that you need to be able to look at, you know, am I on the right side of this or not? So without being a professional or without being an attorney, you certainly can find these. And I will get this up on our website at some point, it's not now. But thank you very much.
Sharon, can you read that? Sharon, yeah, speak to Long Island Housing Partnership. Next, I'm going to ask Peter to do his presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Sharon, for giving us a great encapsulation of fair housing. I'm Peter Corey. I'm with principal with DNF Development. We are affordable housing developers and builders and managers. Much of what we develop is on Long Island. We're based on Long Island. We do a lot of work in Queens as well, but we're finding what we're doing is more and more concentrated in Nassau and Suffolk County. And what I want to talk about today is a recent Supreme Court ruling. Before I get to that, I want to just tell you a little bit about some of our experience in developing on Long Island and some of the challenges that we have faced very, very quickly. In 3 of the recent new projects that we've been involved with, one involved an expansion of affordable senior housing, an attempt to expand affordable senior housing. Sue may remember it. She was very much involved with it too. We attempted to get a variance to expand that project to build additional much-needed senior housing, and we were turned down, and ultimately decided, unfortunately, that it wasn't worth trying to pursue. The barriers were just too great. In other instances, where we ultimately were successful, we were challenged in one project when the village when the village found out that we were developing affordable housing. They attempted to condemn the land on which we were trying to build. we ultimately prevailed upon them to change their minds about that. And in the third instance, this was a property that had been zoned as multifamily, but was restricted to one-bedroom units. So that created a whole host of interesting problems and issues. We were ultimately successful in convincing the municipality to allow us to include 2 and 3 bedroom units in that project. I will say it was a day before we went to trial, but nonetheless, we were successful, and I have to compliment that municipality ultimately really stepped up and was very cooperative in permitting the project to move forward. But this kind of gives you a backdrop of what we're up against in developing in more affluent suburban areas. The court case that I want to talk about that was decided this summer was the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs versus Inclusive Community Projects. And this was the crux of the issue was, is disparate impact cognizable under a Fair Housing Act? And basically, what that asks is, first of all, was there discrimination in how the state housing agency was allocating tax credits, in other words, subsidies to build housing? Was there discrimination, even though there might not have been intent? That was really the crux. And a lower court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, had found that in fact there was discrimination. And so the Texas Department of Housing and Human Affairs brought this to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court affirmed the lower court ruling that in fact that there was, even though there might not have been intent, there was discrimination in how these tax credits were being allocated. They were being too much of the subsidy was being allocated into minority communities and not enough into more affluent suburban communities. So that sets up a whole, even though the issue of disparate impact has been really decided for some time, the fact that the Supreme Court ruled on that sets up a whole set of interesting policy questions and also philosophically raises a number of questions as to how we move forward. It's my interpretation of this ruling that it was not the Supreme Court's intent to prevent subsidies from being used in largely minority areas. What they were saying was that too much subsidy was being allocated to largely minority areas, and not enough was being used in areas where, for example, the schools might be better, where communities might be much more resistant, as we know from our experience on Long Island, to affordable housing. Clearly, this type of development, affordable housing, or any kind of development, is less likely in lower income neighborhoods, because the cost of development oftentimes would necessitate a rent that would not be either marketable or affordable to those who reside in those communities. So certainly there is a need for, and there's a great need for revitalization in communities blighted or that are low income. But there is also, and the Supreme Court affirmed this, there really needs to be a bigger push to develop in more affluent communities.
Here you have that.
So, just, you know, to sum up, I think what we're going to find is that this is going to do two things. This is going to put more pressure on allocating agencies, state agencies. And by the way, Texas is not alone. I would tell you that probably every single housing agency in the country that allocated tax credits is guilty of this practice of over-allocating into lower income communities. And so you're going to see more of a pressure to look for more creative ways to get into more suburban communities, and I think it puts more pressure from a legal standpoint and from an ability to take municipalities that are resistant to affordable housing, i.e. Long Island, to court, and to put more pressure on them to allow affordable housing in the communities. So I think I'll sum it up with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a very interesting case and findings, and I'm thankful that you talked about it because it definitely has impacts on us, what we're doing. So next I want to introduce Randy Kaplan.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you, Vision Long Island and Silver Marie and everybody on the panel. LIBOR and our members are very passionate about fair housing. For the past 20 years, we've been working on an issue that's not so common out there, and that's the discrimination that's taking place in the transfer, the buying and the selling of cooperative properties. Okay, we have a large amount of them here in Nassau County. There are some in Suffolk, and it costs a tremendous amount of these properties in the 5 boroughs of New York City. Let me give you a quick instance of what happens and what my realtors have been hearing, what I've been hearing from some of the lawmakers too. Right now, I go and I apply for a co-op. Let's say I want to go to Bayside, Queens. They check my credit's fine, they like you, you have a good job, we want you to come in here. Okay? They tell me I'm accepted. They tell me it's looking good for me to be accepted. I call the realtor, I call the building manager and I say, I want to bring my wife in to show her the property. She's going to love it. And I walk in the next day, and let's say my wife is African American, or she's Muslim, or she's Pakistani, or, okay. All of a sudden, that probable acceptance is gone. The realtor gets a call, I was turned down. Well, why was he turned down? Well, we don't have to tell you a reason. There's no reason necessary. So this has been a practice, if you will, of circumventing the discriminatory laws, the fair housing laws, for eons. LIBOR has gotten so sick and tired over this for the past 20 years. We've approached lawmakers in the State House. We've had bills back and forth in the Senate and the Assembly. About 10 years ago, we got a little bit more serious, and we said we're going to start focusing on the New York City Council as well. Well, I'm happy to say today that we are currently working with the New York State Assembly, the New York State Senate. I'm going to get back to those bills, but I want to give you a quick history legislatively. We were having such a hard time getting any movement on these bills, or traction, or legs, if you will. That's the political term. We said, okay, you know what? You don't want to help us here at the state level? We went to County Executive Steve Levy in 2009. We explained what the problem was. He readily agreed to help us. We drafted a bill. We had the legislation passed and into law within 2 months after we gave Steve the bill. The law states the following: you must give a reason why a person is turned down. You also must give them a yay or a nay within 45 days of submitting the application. Okay, it's imperative that that person has a time frame to work with, because what was happening, they weren't giving them an answer within a period of time, and they were losing the mortgage commitment. They lost the deals without the co-op boards having to give a reason. So now, since that happened in Suffolk County, there,
Extra 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
since that took place in 2009 in Suffolk County, there has not been one instance of a lawsuit or discrimination. So we were very thankful for that. The media picked up on that. It was great. We said, wow, this is easy. We went to Nassau County. And this is where it gets a little tricky. We went to Nassau County. We met with Ed Mangano. He was very kind. At the time, it was legislator John Ciotti who was going to help us shepherd this through the Nassau County system so we could get a law in place there as well. Well, we had to meet with the Bar Association, and if anyone's a member or an attorney here, forgive me for saying this, but I was never so embarrassed in my professional career. We went to address the Bar Association to tell them what the problems were and how people are being discriminated against openly. There were probably 100 people in the room. I would say 90 of them were very adamant, and 2 of them stood up in particular and said, you realtors need to not worry about who we let in our buildings. You need to just sell the houses. We'll decide who gets in. Okay, so our folks were hemorrhaging, as you can imagine, because the realtors are advocates for the public. So we're out there fighting for them. So for us to hear that we shouldn't be practicing fair housing is a travesty. We heard that and we knew we weren't going to get far at the time. Unfortunately, Peter Schmidt passed away and the administration has changed a little bit. So we intend on going back to Nassau County, and we'll keep you posted on that. Simultaneously, though, we also went to some of the towns in Nassau County. We went to the town of Hempstead, the town of North Hempstead. We went to some of the individual municipalities like the city of Glen Cove, city of Long Beach. Some reception, lukewarm receptions in some areas, other areas saying, yes, they want to help us right away. One of those areas that came to bat, thank you very much, right away was Mayor Wayne Hall in the village of Hempstead. He was amazing. Heavily minority community there, so he understood the ramifications of not having a law like this, okay? Wayne and the village trustees adopted the exact same bill in Suffolk County. So once again, you must have a decision within 45 days. And if that decision is no, why a person can't come in, well, you must give a reason written in writing, okay? Now that reason could be, he's a Yankees fan, he's a Mets fan, he wears blue ties. It can't be something where the same person like me goes in the next day, they tell him they want them, but he comes in with his wife the next day and she's white and they say everything's great. The discrimination has been so blatant. I've had building managers tell the realtors in no uncertain terms, okay? And when President Obama got elected 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I thought the world was going to change here. It's 10 times worse because these people are saying, don't bring me any more blacks. Don't bring me any more Hispanics. I had one person trying to get someone into a building that had a lot of old Irish people in Queens, and they said, don't even think about bringing me a Jew. We don't want any of them kinds in the building. This is like Archie Bunker all over again 40 years later. So,
You got 1 minute.
1 minute, I'm going to talk quickly, I'm sorry. So we're working in New York City simultaneously too. The good news is in New York City, because of the new progressive administration that's in there, we think we have a chance in getting a law passed in the near future. 2 New York City Council members from Brooklyn, Jumaane Williams and Councilman Lander, are going to be introducing it. We have 3 bills before the New York State Legislature, and I'm very proud to say a lot of our members here on the island have sponsored the bills. Chuck Levine from Glen Cove in the Assembly has sponsored a bill that talks about the timeline. Senator Kemp Hannon from Garden City sponsored the same Coast bill. Steve Engelbright wants to give a reason why, but no timeline. And then Assemblyman Perry from upstate wants to do a reason why and the timeline. So we wanted to just let everybody know that the realtors are working very hard. This is one of our top issues and has been and will continue to be so. We want to try and eliminate this legal discrimination that's taking place. And it's just awful in today's world that this happens. And you all mentioned some great things there, but think about it. If a person gets turned down they're not gonna wanna live there, even if they take them to court and they fight it, they're not gonna wanna live there, because who wants to live where they're not wanted? So you mentioned that letter before that the couple received, it's crazy.
Right.
And this is a topic that not many people are aware of, and we're trying to get the word out. So I would love to help anybody I can with questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You know that LIBOR is uncovering something like that. Transparency is so important to ensuring accountability. So thank you. And now I want to introduce Sheila.
Hi, I'm Katrina Stan.
Please.
I find that I do a little bit better. First I'd like to thank Vision Long Island for allowing me an opportunity to be with you this morning and speak on this topic. To my fellow panelists, I thank you for your insight and giving us some information from your perspective as you work in the industry. As mentioned earlier, my name is Sheila Bino. I am a Nassau County legislator in Legislative District 2. Aside from that, I'm the Executive Director of the Huntington Housing Authority. So this morning, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the deconcentration or desegregation of affordable housing or public housing. As an Executive Director of the Housing Authority, there are 5,500 of us across the United States. We get a charge from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to deconcentrate our affordable housing, our housing choice voucher program. So in public housing, there's two forms. We have the fixed subsidy that's tied to a property where the housing authority would own the property and we would rent to homeowners to renters and give them a subsidy. And then we have the housing choice voucher program, and that is a mobilized subsidy. Somebody can go anywhere within our local jurisdiction and be able to find housing through a private landlord and be able to lease up and receive a subsidy in their rental lease. So I will tell you that in my work as a Executive Director of the Housing Authority, one of the things that I'm graded on is to how well I work in diversifying and deconcentrating the affordable housing aspect. We are graded from 0 to 100 annually, and one of the indicators is our expanding housing opportunities. So just by the nature of the fact that someone can take a voucher and go any place within the town of Huntington and find housing and rent it from a private landlord should, in essence, deconcentrate housing. But we're finding that that is not necessarily so, that housing authorities across the country were just kind of getting the vouchers and just steering people within areas that already had a high concentration for housing. So they have mandated that we work with local landlords, building owners, realtors to find housing opportunities outside of the area. And so not only is it an indicator in our scoring that you would in fact receive points if you show efforts that you have undertaken those challenges, but you also get a deconcentration bonus if you can illustrate that 50% of your participants are actually living outside of a poverty area or an area of high minorities. So again, we do that by working very closely with our realtors or landowners, land building owners. But in addition to that, we have a responsibility to go out, seek opportunity, and then provide it to our participants as they come in. And we have to also make them aware of the ability to be mobilized in using their subsidy. So in areas where you have areas where, like the village of Hempstead, where they have a housing authority where unfortunately most of their tract would be, their census tract would be in a high minority and high poverty area, there is a requirement that they would also allow them to take that voucher and move outside of the village of Hempstead and still subsidize them. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is very, very committed to deconcentrating the housing. And I would like to share with you that in the town of Huntington, we haven't qualified yet for the 50%, at the 50% of deconcentration, but we're really knocking on the door. We're at 38%. And that is because we have families that are living not only in Huntington Station, we have people living in Melville, we have people living in Northport, we have people living in East Northport, Cold Spring Harbor. We have families that are living within the town of Huntington, outside of the census tracts that typically have high poverty. One of the other things the Huntington Housing Authority has been successful in doing is building affordable housing outside of a high census tract for poverty. We have an affordable housing complex that's right down the street in Melville. And that particular development is unique on Nassau County, in Suffolk County and on Long Island, in that we have public housing renters living side by side with homeowners. And so, and the range of subsidy is that the renters are going from even 30% median income upwards of 80% of median income. And then we have homeowners who are qualified to purchase from 50% of median income to 80% of median income. So we have really been able to move a development in an area where there were lawsuits. Let's not hit ourselves. It wasn't embraced with open arms. There were lawsuits, and I will tell you the end result of what you see now is different than what the Housing Authority initially embarked on. We initially embarked to have all rental units there, and in an effort to negotiate and make sure that we were able to get some rental, we did include home ownership. And I will tell you that it's been largely a success. We've actually had a renter who was residing there go through some self-sufficiency programs and also go through some counseling with Long Island Housing Partnership, and then ultimately buy one of those homeownership units that later became available for sale. So it is possible to start working toward deconcentration and desegregating housing. And so I'm going to close by putting on my other hat and talk about legislation that I introduced in Nassau County. And so, we all have these, zombie homes, these abandoned homes are in our communities, and they're largely a blight because they're abandoned, and people sometimes squat in the homes and the like. And so, Nassau County, I introduced legislation to create a land bank. And the land bank will then buy those properties, rehabilitate those properties, and then resell those properties. Just by the nature of those properties being scattered across Nassau County, if there was an opportunity for us to then use those homes to require that there would be first-time home buyer programs tied to them for affordable housing, I believe it would deconcentrate and desegregate housing throughout Long Island. So while my bill did not meet the floor, I co-sponsored it with legislator Laura Curran, it did not meet the bill in its form. We did work with the administration, who later introduced their own bill, to have elements of our bill included. They did not include the affordability aspect of it, but they did in fact appoint both Laura and I to the land bank, and we are going to work towards making sure that that affordability becomes a reality through the bylaws. Thank you for your attention this afternoon.
Wasn't that a great panel? Lots of good information. So the last thing that I wanted to show you all was what Joanne would have talked about, which is essentially the Center for Community Solutions Institute for Attainable Homes. I don't know how to do this thing. I knew this was going to happen. Anyway, St. Joseph's created recently this year a Center for Community Solutions. I don't know where the
Do you want me to try and find it while you speak?
That'd be great, thanks. Anyway, St. Joe's recently created a Center for Community Solutions to address issues of access to education, housing, health and wellness, and livability, excuse me. One of those, the center is made up of 5 different institutes, and one of those institutes is the Institute for Attainable Homes. That institute will be, all of the institutes within the center are not necessarily think tank for the sake of being think tanks and, and producing good research and reports that go nowhere, but really to bring together, to be a regional resource, to bring together experts, policymakers, community groups, et cetera, to start thinking about solutions to, to problems within those, various institutes. Where housing is concerned, this is really an exciting entity for the region because it provides a regional resource where, where different people can, bring their independent or individual expertise to a table and look at addressing this issue in a more regional way, but at the same time then take those regional solutions and go back to their local communities, because at the end of the day we are a local rule, home rule region and state, and that is at least for the short term, not going to change, it's not happening, don't worry about it. I wanted to show you the website. I'm going to strongly encourage you to check out that website. Again, it's, I don't have the website with me because I was just bringing it up. Say it again?
sjcny.edu.
Right, and
And
then
you'll look for the community center.
community
page on
center,
that.
and then in there,
Center for Community
the Center for
Solutions.
Community Solutions, and then you
And
click
then
on
the
there.
institutes right under it.
Right, and 3 documents that you'll see on there we recently, were recently completed by the Regional Plan Association. One are housing profiles for every town, village, and city on Long Island. It's housing data that speaks to housing supply for the region, demographics, age of housing, the housing stock, et cetera. And it's about like a 6-page infographic, which is extremely easy to just get all of the information that one could need to give you a good sense of what's currently happening in that particular municipality and what the needs are. You should check it out. It is a great source of information. It was informed by housing experts on Long Island, but again created by the Regional Plan Association. And the Institute will house that type of information, which hopefully will be able to be used by community groups and others, advocates to affordable and fair housing. So that's that. I want to open up for a few questions. We have about 10 minutes at this point.
So I live in the village of Farmingdale, where we have all this great development that we were just discussing upstairs, which is fantastic. I think I'm wondering, so this new development that they have, the rents for 2 and 3 bedrooms are the same as my mortgage, and I own a house in that town. And I'm wondering if, so I don't know who's going to move in, but they say they're 100% occupied, good for them. So I understand that was meant to be transitory as development, but they are still 2 and 3 bedroom units, and I'm wondering if that's, I understand as they said upstairs that the developer's costs often get passed down to the cost of the rent, but really when we're talking about having integrated housing on Long Island, and when we're creating these new developments, who can afford these houses, even with, subsidies from the government and things like that? I mean, is that considered in your field a method by which segregated housing occurs? We talk about all the development that's happening. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly who to direct that question to. It's just something I noticed in my town where I'm like, great, new apartments that nobody can afford. So
We do have a Long Island Workforce Housing Act, which is supposed to have, if you're building more than 4 units, you're supposed to have 10% of it to be affordable. Unfortunately, the way the law is written, it goes up to 120%, 130% of the AMI. So what you have is, that to me is basically market rate.
Right.
So what's happened is that many of the developers are going up to the high end rather than staying at the 80% end. And it depends on what kind of funding they're using as well. If they're using low-income tax credits, it's usually set down much lower. Many of the projects that we're involved in at the partnership are at 80% and below. So we are able to reach people at lower income levels.
Can I just add something? What is the law that Sharon is referring to? Tom DiNapoli and Michael Balboni worked very hard to get this, thinking that this would help Long Island. In fact, in the years since it was in place, we have had one unit in all of Long Island that was built under that law. One unit in Brookhaven, and that unit is a single family.
So just quickly, certainly, you can build affordable housing in any community. I mean, one of the big obstacles in more affluent community, of course, is the price of land, and that is difficult. But you can certainly write down the cost of construction significantly, especially if you're using tax credits, as we do. So you can build, as we are, in areas like Noah, on Moon Road, where we're currently building 118 units of affordable housing that will be affordable to households, families that will be that are at or below between 60 and 80% of their median income. So you're talking about rents ranging, one-bedroom rents ranging from say $950 to $1,300, two bedrooms, $1,200 on up to about $1,800.
So there are ways, then there are incentives and
So
whatnot.
it's really developer's choice.
It is, it's definitely a developer choice, but it is also the municipality.
Yeah.
The developer may be perfectly willing, but
Right.
maybe
And
challenging.
ultimately, then that also goes to public. Dick, and then,
Yeah, Randy, I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of cooperatives, but if a person is going to become a real estate agent, they have to be licensed. So, in the course of getting a license, are they required to learn about the housing laws? And secondly,
Absolutely. I have
what are
two
the
real
penalties?
estate-
Second part, what's the penalty if they violate the law? What are the financial
I'm
penalties?
gonna defer to actually two of my great realtors here who are very involved to answer that for you.
just one, because we.
Okay.
Besides what Randy was talking about with the co-ops, LIBOR is very proactive about making sure that all of their realtors are educated about the federal fair housing laws and the many issues that we come up against. In my company, and in many companies here on Long Island, if the landlord intends to discriminate, we have to walk away, whether it's a rental or a sale, we walk away. We don't get involved at all. The fines that an agent and a broker owner can incur for committing a violation of fair housing, it's just not worth it to lose your license and to go through all of that. So that's very firm in my company as well as many other companies. Unfortunately, there's a couple out there that will still, and I just hope that they get discovered and they get fined and get taught a lesson.
All right, great, and I mean, go ahead.
I was just wondering, this is to a development person, are you involved at all with faith communities building senior housing? Because I have one at my congregation called Hadley House. I think they're going to build a second one. And I found out only recently, when Hurricane Sandy came, they had no problem. They had their own generator too with the senior housing, because a lot of the seniors could be on oxygen and such, So how involved are you with promoting that kind of thing with faith communities?
Of the sort of 1,500 units of senior housing that we've developed over the last 5-6 years, most of that has been with faith-based not-for-profit partners, and they're critical to. We actively seek out faith-based partners.
Would you have a list of them? Let's say if we wanted to see the list of availability, if we know a senior that's looking, for something like that, that would be wonderful. Do you
Yes.
have a list?
Yes.
So afterwards, you
Yeah.
can connect. Janine, and one more after this one.
Janine Maynard, Uniontown. I'm also a board member of the Uniontown Community Land Trust. We're very interested in what's developing with the land bank and the possible relationship between that and land trust. Can you hear me?
Marie?
Yes, so the application for the land bank was actually submitted and it's under review at the state level. So we're pending their approval, and at that point then we'll be able to be in a position to at that point receive some of the settlement money that is in guardianship with the state attorney general, and be able to start at that point looking for properties that they can start to acquire.
Specific to the bylaws, though, the bylaws under development.
Yeah, so we are actually, we first had to send to New York State. There's an order to which it has to occur. New York State has to first approve us at the inception, and then we can start working toward bylaws. I do have copies of the land bank legislation here if anybody's interested in receiving a copy.
Right, one more, and because I know they're going to count me. Anybody? One more?
I would love to ask a question for Randy, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but fascinating information. I really appreciate the work you're doing. It's great that on the realtor side you're required to walk away, but I mean I don't know the laws very well, but is there any, when it's pure blatant discrimination, is there any action that can be taken against the landlord? When it's like clearly illegal, not the subtle, you know, your wife comes, oh, I'm not interested anymore, but the blatant.
You just have to go through the longevity of going through the machinations of going through the court process.
And it's the responsibility of the realtor to actually go through that process, not just to.
Well, no, the
Or
realtor's.
the tenant, I guess.
Right, the realtor's gonna walk away. The problem that happens a lot of times is if you're being discriminated against, you have a legitimate claim, you're not gonna wanna live there afterwards. You're not gonna wanna file all this. Who's gonna wanna live where they're not wanted?
Oh, absolutely, but, so there's no other civil, I mean, I think there's civil penalties against the landlord as well that would, but I guess it's maybe just not always a battle worth fighting, is that what it comes down to?
It depends on the individual.
Okay.
Most people don't fight. Valerie, if you want to add.
I don't know if it's the realtor's role to do the fight, but I can tell you that.
Right,
we have
absolutely.
the Housing Partnership and some of the other community-based organizations,
Right.
as well as the Department of State, New York Department of State, will send people out into the field to
Yes,
test
testers.
if
Sure.
there's discrimination, and if they find so, that landlord will be part of that.
So if you're
lawsuit.
walking away, can you give them a little tip off or no?
Just one thing I want to add. We
You know,
do
like, it
tell
just
people- we do tell people, if there's a problem, if you're being discriminated against, contact
Long Island Housing Services,
Absolutely.
racism, Long Island
It just seems like-
as well as the Department of State.
Okay, it just seems like penalizing the realtor is appropriate, but maybe falls short of the bigger
Penalizing-
problem, you know?
Oh, you mean if we are part of the
If- yeah.
discrimination, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know,
And by the
obviously
way,
it's a
I
problem,
forgot to
but.
mention, every 4 years, a realtor has to take a course
Continuing education.
in fair housing, otherwise they can't stay licensed.
Great.
Yes.
All right, so thank you so much for